Hi, welcome to our session today titled Breaking with Tradition, Embracing the New Data Center. My name is Chad Peters. I work at Service Express. I've been in the data center industry for over 24 years. Today, we're going to talk about the evolution of the data center. We're going to talk about some pros and cons, and we're also going to talk about what we've heard from other IT professionals like you. So let's jump in and talk about this data center and how it's evolved and it's changed and the shifts that it's had in technology. So first of all, when we think about the data center, like me, I grew up, in a data center, what I would call the traditional data center, where I had separate servers, separate storage, separate networking, all from different manufacturers, potentially all with different maintenance agreements, that my goal was to make them all talk to one another, which in itself was a challenge. So that's our traditional data center. That's kind of where things have been for decades. Well, as the data center continues to evolve, we've kind of moved into what they call the converged data center or converged infrastructure. So we still have separate server, storage, and network, but now it's sold as one solution. So instead of me going out and kind of piecemealing my solutions, now I'm doing kind of one overall solution and a converged solution. And a little bit later, we'll talk about why that's important or what the pros might be of converged. And lastly, we're going to talk about hyperconverged. So now we're taking converged one step further and we're condensing it down to one piece of hardware. So in a traditional data center, it was separate server, storage, network, managed completely different. And a converged infrastructure, still separate server, storage, network, but now sold as kind of one solution. Now in a hyperconverged environment, now it's one piece of equipment that contains your server, your storage, and your network. So that's really where the data center has been evolving over really the last several years. This isn't something that's happened overnight. I mean, like I said, I've been involved in it for the last couple of decades and watched this kind of slowly transform to where it is now. So let's take a closer look at each one of these kind of evolutions and what are some of the pros and cons to each one. So before we dive into each one of these evolutions and pros and cons, we'll also hit on what I would call cloud architecture. And now, right, this is now where we're hosting something outside of our building. And all of us are leveraging some aspect of cloud architecture today, whether it's at work or in our personal lives. So let's take a closer look at each one of these different evolutions in the data center and what are some of the pros and what are some of the cons that we're going to experience. So first of all, let's take this traditional data center that we've talked about, where I mentioned that you've got separate server, storage, and network equipment. And what are some of the pros and cons? Let's start with the pros. First of all, it's super prevalent in the data center. Like, this hasn't gone away. This hasn't disappeared. It's not going to disappear. It's still a thing that many data centers and data center managers and CIOs and businesses leverage today. Another pro with the traditional data center is that it allows you to really bring in a multi-vendor solution. So you're not locked into one vendor for everything. You can have different storage vendor, different network vendor, different server vendor, and bring in kind of what you want. You're able to cherry pick what you're looking for from the specification standpoint. Another pro of a traditional data center is it gives you a lot of control. That data center is on premise. It's in your building. So you have a lot of control over the equipment that's in that data center and the security in that data center. And lastly, you have a lot of control over the compliance and compatibility because maybe you need certain hardware to run certain applications or certain operating systems. Well, that's all within your control to do so in that traditional data center. So those are some of the pros that we'll see in a traditional data center. Let's talk about some of those cons that are associated with a traditional data center. One, well, if you've got all these different vendors in there, all these different vendor products, well, guess what? You're going to have different management tools to administer those products. And so that's kind of a big con with that is now I've got to skill up on all these different interfaces and management tools and administrative tools to be able to configure and deploy this different hardware. Another kind of con we'll say with that is that it might lead to more of a complex support situation. What I mean by that is if I've got all of these different OEMs in my building with all this different hardware, I might have to have different maintenance agreements with different companies and different SLAs to support all of this. And so maybe a challenge I might have is all of these different companies talking with one another and working with one another. Unless I'm able to maybe find, a single company, some type of third-party solution that can do all of those. Otherwise, I might have multiple vendors in my data center that I'm working with. Because of that, that might lead to some slower issue resolution. Is it my storage issue? Is it a SAN switch issue? Is it a network switch issue? Is it a server issue? Is it an operating system issue? And now I have to have maybe all these different vendors working with one another to come up with a solution. And so that can create maybe a little bit slower resolution on some of my problems. Kind of right along with things working well together is lifecycle management. So now I've got a situation in my data center where I'm going to upgrade an operating system, or I'm going to apply a patch, or I'm going to put on a piece of firmware onto a component. Well, if I do that on my server, is my server still going to be compatible with my SAN switch? If I do that on my SAN switch, is my SAN switch still going to be compatible with my storage solution? If I do that on my storage solution, is it still going to be compatible with my server? So that's another layer and complexity when you think about the traditional data center with all these different vendors in there, is when I start to touch one thing, do I have to touch 10 things? Or will it just work? So those are some pros and cons to the traditional data center. There's certainly a place in the data center for that type of infrastructure, and there will be for, I'm assuming, years to come. So let's move forward a little bit and kind of talk about the evolution here. So if you think about traditional data center where I've got separate server, storage, network, potentially separate vendors for each, and we look ahead at a converged infrastructure. So now I might still have separate vendors for my server, storage, and network, but now it's sold as really one solution. It comes maybe in one cabinet, one rack together. The nice part about converged is it gives me a consolidated management interface. So I have one pane of glass to manage all the server, the storage, and the network. I don't have to learn all of these different management interfaces. I just have to learn one, and that one interface will then talk to all the rest. So that's a really good pro when you think about converged. Another pro of that is all the components are interconnected, right? They're sold as one solution. They're designed to work with one another. The interoperability has been tested. So that really leads me to quicker deployment. When I get that cabinet in, I can get it up and running and deployed much faster than if I were to take all this, dissimilar equipment, different vendors, and try to make it all talk to one another. I might have to skill up on how to configure each piece, and that might lead to a lengthy time frame for deployment. Whereas when I go converged, it's designed to go out of the box and go up and running very, very quickly. So there's cons with converged, just like there were cons with traditional. One of the cons with a converged solution, a converged infrastructure, is I might be locked into the solution, right? When I buy it, I'm kind of buying an out-of-the-box kind of canned solution. And what that is going to lead to is maybe not as much flexibility and scalability as I would want. Because I'm just, like I said, I bought this kind of an out-of-the-box solution. It comes the way it comes. It's going to have so much capacity, so much CPU and memory, and that's what it is. If I want to get more, I have to go buy another out-of-the-box solution. And so from a scalability, flexibility standpoint, I might be a little more limited there than I might be maybe in a traditional sense, or in a minute when we talk about hyperconverged. Another con is that it may not support some of those legacy applications and operating systems that I have. Because as I start to move to converged, I'm probably going to also be implementing some virtualization. And that may not support some of the things I have running in my data center. So again, just some things to be mindful of when you think about moving from a traditional data center to a converged data center. And now if we look ahead to hyperconverged. So when we think about hyperconverged, a couple of things that are pros of hyperconverged. Again, I continue that consolidated management. I get one pane of glass to manage all my hardware. That's great. That makes it really, really easy for my administrators and my team to deploy, manage, and maintain that hardware. Another thing that's nice is all the hardware and software solutions are on one server. So I don't have my server, storage, and network all separate. Now they're kind of one piece. They're all together. Another nice part of hyperconverged is it's easy to scale. What I mean by that is typically in a hyperconverged infrastructure, you have nodes. You have nodes in a cluster, and when I want to scale, I just add more nodes to the cluster, and that lets me scale up. Because I have that one pane of glass, and because it's all underneath kind of one hardware umbrella, it's easier to deploy. So those are all great pros of hyperconverged. Well, just like converged and just like traditional data center, there's a few cons associated with hyperconverged as well. One is I'm locked into a vendor typically, right? I'm buying a hyperconverged solution. So unlike a traditional data center where I can mix and match different vendors and get them all to talk, in hyperconverged, I'm kind of buying one vendor solution. Now, unlike converged, where I might be locked into scalability, I can only go with what I bought. In hyperconverged, I can continue to scale out by adding nodes. Well, the downside of that is sometimes I only need more storage. I don't need more compute, I don't need more memory, but I still have to buy a whole nother node to scale. So I'm getting memory and compute and network that I maybe didn't need, or maybe I needed more compute and I'm getting storage that I didn't need. So with the scalability, while it's easy to do, I may be paying for some things that I don't necessarily need. Right? Maybe I only need more memory, maybe I only need more compute, maybe I only need more storage, but I'm kind of getting all of them every time I scale. So that's kind of a downside to hyperconverged. And just like converged, once I go hyperconverged, I'm going to be implementing some layer of virtualization. So again, some of those applications, those proprietary applications, specialized applications may not roll over to a hyperconverged infrastructure. And last but certainly not least is cloud computing. And cloud is really sprinkled in everywhere. So this isn't what I would call a linear straight line where you go traditional to converged to hyperconverged to cloud. It doesn't really work that way. Cloud can be kind of sprinkled in throughout. Once you've really started to virtualize your environment, whether you virtualized a traditional data center, you're leveraging virtualization in a converged or hyperconverged infrastructure, you're starting to apply elements of cloud already. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons of cloud computing. One of the big pros of cloud computing is you pay as you go. You only pay for what you need when you need it. So think about that in a traditional data center. You go out and you buy racks of equipment and storage and servers and network, but maybe you're not fully utilizing them yet. So now I have wasted resources. I have unused resources, and I'm also paying to power those resources. I'm paying to heat and cool that data center where those resources are at, but I'm not fully leveraging them yet. Whereas with cloud computing, now you're able to pay for what you're leveraging when you're leveraging it. And that's a really good thing when you think about one of the biggest issues in most data centers and for most companies is how do I reduce my IT cost? Well, cloud computing allows you to do that because you're paying for what you need when you need it. Because you're able to do that, it's also very flexible. If you want to add more, you just go add more. You have that cloud provider turn on those additional resources when you need them turned on. Conversely, you can have them turned off. You can do some on-demand resources and say, well, I'm not using them any longer. I'm not using them right now. Go ahead and turn them off. I don't need them. So that's some of the pros of cloud computing is you get some flexibility, you get some on-demand where you can turn things on and off. And like I said, you're paying for things as you're using them. Some of the big cons with cloud computing. One, security. Because that security, those patches, those updates are being handled now by the provider. You're somewhat out of the loop on that. Not entirely necessarily, but you're a little more removed from the security level of the resources. And also, once you start using a cloud provider to host your applications, you've now lost that physical access to the hardware. So those are a couple of the cons that are associated with cloud computing historically. Now, another con that you might also see with cloud computing is, again, going back to that traditional data center where I had to have certain hardware to run my very specific and proprietary applications. Well, now if I try to move to cloud, those apps may not translate. So that might be a roadblock for me going to cloud, just like it was going to hyperconverged or going to converged. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is we've mentioned all these, kind of the evolution of the data center, kind of where it's trending hardware-wise and technology-wise. Well, I wanted to also share with you what we found as we spoke to over 500 IT professionals just like you, and we asked them various questions about their data center, their business, their teams, and really had them share with us their priorities and challenges as they see for their businesses. So I wanted to start first with top priorities. Right out of the gate, the kind of the highest priority for most of the people that we talked to was security. So when you think about that and look back at what we've already spoken about with pros and cons of kind of the evolving data center. So if security is your number one issue, like your top priority that you got to figure out, you may not be ready to go to cloud yet because security is a big thing that's in front of you. So maybe you don't leverage the cloud 100%. Maybe only a few things go to the cloud. Another thing that we kind of found as we talked to other IT professionals was that they wanted to reduce IT costs. I think anyone you talk to, whether or not they're an IT or just any consumer, yeah, we want to save money. When you want to save money, you might be thinking about moving away from that traditional data center. Traditional data centers, generally speaking, I know it's not the case for everyone, but generally speaking, you have a little bit higher cost of ownership in that traditional data center. You've got maintenance potentially on a multi-vendor level. You've got power and cooling of that data center. So you got to heat and cool and power all these components. So generally your cost in a traditional data center is a little bit higher because you're taking up more space with all of these pieces and parts. As you move to converged and hyper-converged, you're able to have a little smaller footprint with that hardware. And so that's going to help you with maintenance costs, power, and cooling. And certainly if you go to the cloud, now you're capitalizing on that pay-as-you-go option. So that's really going to help with IT cost, but it may not support all the things you're trying to move to it. So you can see as we kind of talk about the evolving data center, it begins to snap into where IT professionals have priorities. Another priority for a lot of data center professionals is trying to understand all these new technologies. And so that's why you may see data centers kind of stay traditional, is they're really just trying to learn what's out there. Like if I go to hyperconverged, what skills am I going to need to implement that? You know, what don't I know that I'm going to have to learn? And so that might even slow that roadmap of going from traditional to converged, hyperconverged, or cloud. As we think about challenges for many IT professionals, one of the biggest challenges, as we already kind of talked about and we kind of knew already, is budget and cost reductions. And so again, now I have that decision point of going, well, I can save money if I move to the cloud, but wait a minute, security is a top priority of mine. So is cloud going to work for everything I have, or will it not? Or maybe I want to leverage some of these new technologies and I can't because my applications won't roll over to them. So you got to kind of weigh that cost a little bit with security concerns that you have and with, quite honestly, your current applications. Will they work in an environment that will allow me to save cost? Or will they not work? So you have to figure that out. And then also this changing technology adoption, right? Kind of going back to the priority is I need to understand these new technologies. Well, a challenge is I got to understand these new technologies. So sometimes I'm held back from leveraging hyperconverged or converged because I don't know how to do it yet. I don't know how to take advantage of it yet. And so I need to learn that. And so you may not be ready to make a jump into converged or hyperconverged because we just haven't skilled up yet. Which leads us right into when you think about talent and workforce. Do I have the right people to carry me to the next level, right? To get my business, my data center into that next level of converged or hyperconverged. So really, as we think about all the things that we've really talked about in this session, notice I didn't give you a one-size-fits-all. I didn't come out and say, oh, if you just go hyperconverged, you're all set, you're done, like stick a fork in it, no problem. The reality is, it's going to be a hybrid solution. As you look ahead, hybrid is becoming more widely adopted in many data centers. So you're going to start to look at it and go, what things make sense to go to cloud? What things make sense to transition to hyperconverged? And what things make sense to keep in a traditional data center environment? And you're going to really have to sit down with your teams, your application providers, and really decide what makes sense to move to where. But most likely at the end of this, when you think about your priorities, your challenges, and your current infrastructure, you're probably going to land somewhere in a hybrid solution. It's just a matter of how far you lean one way or the other. Is it going to be mostly traditional with a little bit of hyperconverged? Is it going to be mostly hyperconverged with a little bit of traditional? Is it going to be a lot of cloud with a little bit of converged? So you're going to have to kind of snap those puzzle pieces together and see what fits best for you based on application, based on user need, based on risk and reward with security and access to hardware, based on OSs that you're currently running and how they're going to work in a different environment. So these are all questions that need to be asked and need to be answered as we think about embracing this new data center and how it continues to evolve and change as we move forward. Thank you for watching our session today.